on the Hockey IQ podcast today. We bring on Whittaker Heart. One, Whittaker, badass name. Two, excited to have you on. I know talking with some friends of mine, you put in the hours to get really good at scouting. So you're currently with Elite Prospects. 2027 is going to be your full third year all the way in. I know you dabbled a little bit in 24, but really curious to pick your brain. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Really excited to do this and talk to you and get to know you a little bit better and talk about some hockey here.
Yeah, I've got my mocked team revac. So this year's a tough projection with CBJ getting that 14th pick. Lot of ways to go, but I think it was kind of a perfect example of what I want to start with, which is like tools versus play style. Like you get the players that have great tools, but you're like, yeah, they got to figure out how to actually play hockey. Then you got the other ones like they know how to play hockey, but are the tools high enough? Curious your thoughts as you're looking at a draftee or a prospect, like where do the tools come in versus the play style? What could be malleable? What can't? What's harder to develop? What's not? And where do you kind of lean with players? Because I've seen plenty that go both ways. They have tools that burn out. I mean, you can look at the AHLers, put them on a line, and go from one end to the other end, and AHLers probably beat the NHLers half the time to the other end with just physical tools. But then play style doesn't mean everything, and you've got some junior teams that play great, attractive play style that probably is better for development than others that are, chip and chase and not really making.
Yeah, this was probably the biggest question that we talk about at Elite Prospects from a day-to-day basis. And we scout multiple levels as well, 16U and 8 and the NHL draft age, which there's a pretty big disparity at those two ages, which I think is important to denote because when you're younger, you have the tools and you're developing and some of the more refined physical skills, some of the more refined um, ways that players read the game. Like we see a lot of kids playing breakneck, one-on-one, full ice, coast to coast hockey at younger levels, whereas at the NHL draft, you see you value the sense and the ability to read the game and play the game. And I think you look at a guy like Ben Kendall, a kid that came up this past year. He played games. He played a full season in the National Hockey League. He played playoff games. And a guy like that, where he's a little bit smaller, he's pretty quick, but he's not the biggest guy in the world. He's a good shot, but he doesn't have the hardest shot in the world. Um, a kid that might be a little more capped out physically, one would say, and we evaluate that and we say, okay, he might be quick to make the National Hockey League, but development, it's a marathon, not a sprint, and we try and evaluate that evenly. Who are the players that have the highest upside? Well, we evaluate that based on who can manipulate the game, who has the ability to fill into their body. A kid that's 6'4", 180 pounds, can skate, rip the puck. Maybe they don't have a fully developed understanding of the game yet, but some of that can come with game reps and their archetype especially, which we talk about situational sense and role sense all the time, where some players where you look at their role and what they're going to fill at the National Hockey League and what buckets they're going to fill and sometimes you're looking at players that require different levels of sense, where a center that might play in the middle of the ice, a center that's going to connect plays and play beyond the first wave and connect through transition and hook passes and little lane fills and support and rotations. Well, that player, it doesn't matter how many tools they have, how physically developed they are, how hard their shot is. If they don't have the ability to read the game and the ability to play the game in smart, connective ways, it really doesn't matter. And then you look at other guys, some of the kids that have came through the draft the past few years, where they're kind of becoming a dying breed, but a kid that might be, 6'4", 200 pounds, more of a straight line winger. Well, the physical tools are going to become a lot more important for that type of kid. And a kid that's super explosive in a straight line and can finish a hit and rotate off a puck and manage a puck below the hash and make those plays off the back wall. Well, all of a sudden there's only two, three reads that a player is really processing to play their style of game, whether that's supporting on a top line or are hammering on a bottom six. You think of a guy like Josh Anderson. Well, his physical tools matter a lot more than his sense, and his sense isn't great, but he makes it work and he scores goals in the playoffs. And then there are other guys that are centers that play in the National Hockey League. You look at a guy like Viggo Bjork, who was drafted this past year. He's 5'9". He's small kid, really small kid, and he just signed his entry level contract, and he's gonna play games in the NHL this coming fall for Winnipeg. And he's just the ultimate processor, a kid who's just his brain's a computer. And it's so important for these guys that are maybe a little bit smaller, don't have the physical tools. Like the sense is everything, and it even is more at a younger age where when you get to the National Hockey League, there are certain things that you can't overcome quite as much. And we see that with defensemen, we see that with wingers, but it's um it's different based on every player's archetype, which is kind of a cop-out answer to say, but the roles that players are going to fill is it's crucial for determining this. And there's so many different types of players that can succeed at the next level of hockey.
Feel like with that, right? There's the archetype, like what are you going to be in the future, especially with where you want to go. There's like a willingness too, because there's a lot of people that are capable of doing things, but are they willing to do those things? Are you willing to adapt to the role and work your way up the lineup versus I'm a skill guy. Well, if you're not getting reps on this team, well, I got to move somewhere else. So like kind of what's that adaptability? But I'm curious. You mentioned about like when you're talking about have high end projection or just more upside, room to fill in, ability to manipulate, those types of things. But I'm curious when we think about upside, everyone was pretty shocked when Barkov went second overall. Hindsight, great pick. But, he was a kid who was already filled out, big body already, didn't have the flashy skill that you would expect, but is really good at playing the game and just doing the little things right and having that consistency shift in and shift out, kind of like the Patrice Bergeron, 7-Eleven, always open, always supporting, uh, but still has the ability to put the puck in the back of the net. So it's I feel like scouting super hard because it's obvious to see the ones who are like, okay, that kid's just super small, get strength, will be good. But the ones that are kind of already built, your Liam Ogrins, the Barkovs of the world, where they kind of come pre-ready with the size, probably Gleb Pugachev in this year's past draft, like pretty much you kind of have an idea of what that body's going to end up being versus maybe a Bjork where his dad's actually a little bit taller, so he might grow another inch or two while he's in the NHL.
Yeah, for sure. And it's tricky, right? I think in the pro game it matters a little bit more, whereas when you're evaluating kids at 15 years old, it's a bit of a dice roll, whether that's for college hockey or the USHL or for the Canadian Hockey League. Barkov's he's a great example, and we saw a kid last year come up, Anton Frondel, who drew a lot of similar considerations, and he was a filled out prospect. And I think when you get these kids that are developed, it does help a little bit because you can see the complete picture. And even if a kid is 6'4", 210 pounds, 6'3", 220, like a big thick kid like a Pugachev, they're still not going to have all their fully developed contact skills at that age. They're not completely going to understand how to roll off pressure, how to pin a guy on the wall, how to seal a check, how to feel out contact, spin one way, give a bump, shift, shimmy. Like these are skills that you can continually evaluate, especially as players develop into the National Hockey League. And you look at guys like maybe like an Anton Lundell, who still a bit lankier of a kid, a bit longer, but he has every tool in the world. And he developed a little bit slower, a little bit later, especially as he got into the pro game. But there's a there's a place for so many types of guys, and you you see these guys that have fully developed bodies and physical abilities, but it's about refining your game once you get to that spot, I think. And we talk about late developers all the time, and we talk about guys that have an advantage because they learn the game, but there still are plenty of guys that don't have that and maybe developed a little bit quicker. And at that point, it's about refining your details, your process. How can you become a more detailed player by the time you're 23, 24 years old? I think it's all really important stuff, and there's different types of players and a lot of guys that make it work at different capacities. And I love the Barkov example because he's one of my favorite players to watch.
You bring up a great point about like define re you know refining your skills and adding the details and the wrinkles to it. That's one of the reasons I started the Hockey IQ newsletter and podcast because these are the type of things that I wanted to be talking about and the conversations I wanted to be having with my own players, my own team, so we can develop these things. Like one of the great compliments is you've got a detailed player. Like, oh, he's so detailed. Like, okay, that means he's doing the little things within the game that create the advantages. Picking the defender's stick as you're entering the zone. You kick and drive, and you're driving through a stick. You're not just driving to the net aimlessly, so you're actually creating space for the guy on the puck, even though you don't have it. So that's just one example, but those details over and over again are the centers low and slow on the breakouts and consistently open and available, stops and starts in the D zone, like all these little details that go into winning hockey that you don't often have at the youth levels, but all coaches at the youth levels are always hoping to evolve and define their players into is having all those details. Because players, like the big skills really don't change. Like if you're fast, you tend to always be fast. But how do you use that speed? If you've got X, Y, and Z attribute, how do you shape it and use it more often? Or how do you shape the game or put yourself in positions where you get to use it more often? I think that is a critical element. I'm curious from your perspective, we're talking about getting detailed. We're starting to be like, how are you like very annoying to play against? So brings up the general overarching idea of like hard to play against. Like for you, when you're thinking about what does a player have to do to be hard to play against, what does that look like? What's that mean?
Well, I think it can mean a lot of different things. Um, there's the general older idea that a hard to play against player is a guy that's standing in front of the net and giving whacks and cross checks and just clearing guys out. And it's true, it is hard to play against a guy that does that, but I think functional pace is a really, really important skill to talk about when you're talking about being hard to play against. Players that, and you just mentioned, right? Like guys that have speed and guys that can skate fast, a big skill that never really goes away. Well, it's super important, but a kid that knows how to leverage a speed differential and how to create through layers and how to accelerate under the puck and stay connected to the game, well, that's really, really hard to play against. That's almost harder to play against than a guy that's just going out and competing. And the compete level, it is everything, right? Like you look at a guy like Zach Benson, maybe in the playoffs this past year. He's a great example. A kid that plays in all three zones. That gets under sticks. He's battling. He's going to the front of the net. That's that's a great example of being hard to play against. But I think Nathan McKinnon is hard to play against as well, or a McDavid, or a Clayton Keller is incredibly hard to play against. I love the way a guy like a Keller plays, or even like a Gavin McKenna, where you're pulling pucks off the wall, where you're recognizing layers, you're making plays against the grain, guys that can reverse the ice just off one touch, guys that can make a play off one touch along the back wall. That's all of a sudden at the front of the net. That's hard to play against as well. So it's functional pace. It's how quick can you process the game? How quick can you transport a puck? Quick can you improve the conditions of the puck? That's that's to me the biggest example of being hard to play against. And it's these are the skills that as you start to get older, it's not just about skating fast anymore. It's not just about hitting anymore. It's about filling filling holes in the game essentially for coaches and the way your team wants to play and the way that you want to create your identity as a player. Not everyone has the physical tools to create. Not everyone has the mental tools to create. So there's a lot of different players that are hard to play against. I think Clayton Keller is he's not maybe traditionally as hard to play against as a guy like Zach Benson in the way that a lot of thoughts about the game are, but I think it's a great example of the different types of players that can impact the game that can be difficult to play against in almost any situation.
Yeah, Keller's a great example of mentally. Yeah, you
Yeah.
watch a game and you probably don't pick up on the nuances unless you're really following him and deep diving into why is he doing what he's doing. Uh, and I liked your point around like how do you create? Because so many players have to create different ways based on their assets, their tools, their capabilities. It could be physical. So obviously, Josh Anderson is going to create off of physical tools, and then like the idea of you have to be big and clear the net front. Okay, that's one hard way to play against, but Lane Hudson's defensive metrics are quite great, but he has to play a completely different style because he's not having the capability to clear the net front. He's got to figure out timing. He's got to figure out leverage. So how do you create your advantages, physical and mental, and when do you need to create each of those? Because I know plenty of players that are very smart and they're almost like too smart for their own good that they forget like I need to physically put this player in a bad position. And maybe I take two, three hard strides, get the guy to pivot, and as soon as he pivots, then boom, I can go to work with my mental advantages that I have rather than just rely on I've got the ability to pass and you come to me and then I dish rather it's making sure that we're using our feet even if we don't have them because there are situations where everyone can use their feet to create the advantage. Mark Stone's a great example of that. Slow boots or on the defensive side, McNabb is a great example of really slow feet. And yet the Knights won a Stanley Cup with them and continue to do well with them, but they both have limitations to their feet, but they also know when and where to place them and when do I use my strength, on that physical tool and advantage that I have and not just rely on 90% of the time, but try to get closer to that middle 50-50 that really creates a quagmire in the mind of the defenseman of how to play you.
I think a lot of it is the way players rotate. Um, a lot of guys that rotate off the puck, you create your advantages that way. And to me, it's so much of the game is about how quick can you process concepts and how frequently can you execute on them. So it's a blend, right, of the the hard skill, the mechanics, the the motor skills to execute the concepts frequently, but you also have to recognize them at high paces as quick as you can in the NHL and college hockey and AHL. It's I like that you mentioned the balance between, using your brain and using your feet, and it's really important. You see you see guys all the time that maybe are thinking the game too much and they drive us crazy, where you'd like to see a kid manipulate and a kid take strides and use their feet to create speed differentials and enter the zone a certain way. Um, and mentally, sorry, I'm just blanking.
I think I feel like Nick Robertson just signed with the Penguins. Be another example of a kid who he is smart, but he leans into the physical advantages so often. Like I'm gonna go be a wrecking ball and get pucks back and like overly intense. So it's like the opposite of like he would be better off if he just relaxed and did less. Like Lionel Messi's the classic example where usually he gets on a team and he has to tell his teammates like stop moving so much. You're you're,
Yeah.
you're like putting yourself into bad situations and bad positions and he's walking around half the game anyways. But when he goes, he goes. Like it's very efficient in the movements, and it's like using the brain but knowing when to go. Versus you've got physical tools, but you still need to figure out when do I apply these advantages. So you can't be a complete dummy. If you're going to be dumb, you got to be tough, as we all know. But you still have to have an idea of when do I go versus when do I don't go. Yeah, it's like the common thing you find in youth hockey is players start playing when they get a puck, like they're just kind of hanging out, and then they get a puck and then they skate. Well, there's not much passing that's even available yet. You've got to move to make passing possible in the first place. So for me, it's like the kids who lean into the physical stuff, you need to get them to relax and do less. And then the kids who lean into the mental stuff, you have to get them to do more and skate more. And it's a completely different style of coaching, which is why it's like the coach that it's not going, well, we need to work harder. Okay, well, everyone's skating faster, and suddenly you're having worse performances versus the coach is like overly teaching. Like you got to find that fine line, just like players need to find the fine line of figuring out who needs to lean into their physical side more and who needs to lean into their brains a little bit more and figure out what players do I have in front of me? How do I meet them where they are and give them the tools to, I call it the rate limiter. You're like trying to constantly eliminate what's the rate limiter right now so they can continue to excel faster and faster and lean into what makes them great.
I like that you mentioned the skating side of the game for this because we see it and it's a trap that you can fall into, I think, with scouting the NHL draft in particular, where you see the kids that are flying around that are playing at 100 miles an hour and it looks great, but the kids that maybe aren't supporting the puck and aren't connected to the play and aren't skating through holes and skating through layers and timing their routes, which is one of the most important things in offensive hockey, in my opinion. You you see players that, well, maybe they're taking themselves out of the play. Maybe they're disconnected to the overall offensive idea, which is to create advantages. A kid that can skate on the back heels of a defender and pick up a puck, a loose puck, and rotate behind the net and wheel and time a scissor cycle with a high defenseman. Well, I'll take that all day long over a kid that's trying to stretch for a breakaway. And we see these problems in minor hockey all the time, where it's almost become a one-on-one game a little bit, like you alluded to, where it's you look at some of these 14U, 15U games, and it's almost our player tries to go through everyone, and then he either scores or turns it over, and then their best player tries to go through everyone. He either scores or turns it over, and it's the next line out, all right? The second best
So
player
it's a
tries,
little bit of a ping pong hockey, though, I like to say. It just keeps going back and forth, and it's when do you
exactly.
finally get through?
And it's these are hurdles that I think a lot of coaches face, and it's about creating game-like situations, I think, for players to where they're facing these situations and these looks and these reads as much as possible, where you're shortening the ice, you're making a smaller geography for players, and you're changing the boundaries of the game. And I think that's when you see things really start to come out for some kids where they realize, okay, how do I throw a deceptive fake, create a little bit of space, create a pocket. Now I rotate off it. Now do I hit a seam pass? How do I create that seam? Okay, well, there's a defender's stick there. Okay, well, how do I get that defender's stick out of there? And you start to access that, and I think your feet starts to play a role in that too. If you're creating in transition, which we see a lot of transition creation in the modern game now, you need to create speed differentials. And you need to create pockets and layers in the way you attack. If you attack three flat across the blue line, there's not exactly a lot of space to work with. You need a guy to set a pick, a guy to set a route. And that's where I think some of the more advanced players start to shine. A kid that can recognize, okay, the back heels of this defender, if I skate off them, he's not going to be able to pivot and turn onto the puck. Okay, well, now I have a new two-on-one created. Now it's about my brain taking over. I just created an advantage with my feet. Now, how do I manipulate the last play to create a try at the net and potentially a goal? So I think it's everything works in tandem when you look at the best players and the guys like a Macklin Celebrini, where his feet are always going. Like Celebrini, he's a brilliant player in both his approach and his physical tools, and you see them work in tandem so beautifully. And like you see him play at the Olympics, and it's just a constant wave of hockey sense, and it's just a constant wave of processing. And he's playing the game at 100 miles an hour, and he's thinking it quicker than everyone, and he's better than everyone at 19 years old already. So
Yeah.
it's a great example of someone that works in tandem with their feet and their sense.
Well, there's the piece when you're thinking about players where it's you want players that are willing to do things. Just because that's a big hurdle, right? So you've got to have the willingness. The old adage of like, do you want a tiger or do you want to paint and like try to tame them, or do you want to try to paint stripes on a kitty? Like both have their upsides and downsides with that, and definitely people will lean towards the I'd rather try to tame the tiger. So when I look at biases, most people are going to lean towards that. The next thing, to your point of like how do players manipulate, and it's also like knowing your opponent. Like is your opponent reading eyes like Mitch Marner, you're going to play him very differently than someone who's quite aggressive where you can get him to lean one way and use the back door versus someone who's a little more patient and reading eyes and waiting and reading you. So now you've got to be a little more physically deceptive rather than trying to route a guy out space, for example. So when you're thinking about how do you create the advantages, it's one, and who do you got in front of you? How are they playing you? That'll dictate how you should play them. Just knowing the basics. Like you don't because everyone was looking for the genius, and while there's many geniuses, it's all relative. So you just have to figure out where do I fit in to your point earlier around role and situational reading, the risk management, puck management. I think that's big. And then just like the bias of like willing, which is why you always will see like a Ridley Greig and players like his archetype that are willing to be physical, mix it up, kind of be a stir the pot kind of player because you can have players that are willing to do what needs to be done versus players that may be a little more like this is what I do, and they're not adaptable to the environment, to the game, and unable to evolve at a quick enough pace to allow their talent to shine through and actually go from looking great to actually being truly effective. Because everyone talks about being the most skilled, and we want skilled players, skilled players, skilled players, but really what you want is to be able to turn that skill into pucks in the back of the net, which is really effectiveness and efficiency. So players that are effective and efficient at the end of the day are what actually drive the bus, which is where you get, your Patrice Bergerons hitting the Hall of Fame. While not maybe the most skilled player, dang, is he efficient and effective.
Yeah, absolutely. It's there are certain plays that we track and that we prioritize that guys like Bergeron and I think of a guy like Kirill Kaprizov as well, especially that they're so efficient at. Like if you want to give a winger example or a a guy like a Dorofeyev maybe on Vegas, a player I love. Um, the ability to pick up a puck off the wall with pace and contact is one of those skills that we talk about all the time where we talk about efficiency and it's a directiveness, right? Like players that make plays with a concrete idea of what they're doing with creativity mixed into that where they're not predetermining plays which we see every once in a while with certain prospects, but instead it's this puck is going to get into the middle of the ice and it's going to get there for a shot attempt. And if I need to saucer a pass through a guy's legs, I'll do it. And if I need to reverse hit a guy and roll off contact and make a play against the grain through the second layer, I'll do that as well. And we talk about the play on the wall where it's a skill that almost I don't want to say every player has to have nowadays because there's certain archetypes that play better in space and play better in connectivity. But you look at a guy like maybe a Mikko Rantanen, a guy that can pick up a puck or a Kucherov and spin off and roll off into space. I'm sure you love Kucherov because the sense is just it's out of control. Um, a guy that understands timing and layers of the game. It's you put together a Hall of Fame career, like you said, and um, it's the physical attributes, the ability to spin the puck and the ability to make passes, a bunch of different techniques of passes, right? Like you have your saucer passes, you ever plays that go on the backhand. It's the hardwired ability.
Adaptability. Yeah, it's the adaptability
Exactly.
of the skill and the passing. And yeah, you can be like water where you're just going to fit to whatever situation it is,
Yep.
which I
Yeah.
absolutely love. Um, I do want to shift slightly because I know you're a big fan of the University of Denver and their coach, David Carl. So curious as to your thoughts on like when we're thinking about at a team level and coordinating all the players, like what makes a good breakout, for example? Like, what do they do so well to get the puck out of the zone? Or like what from an overall concept of creating space for the defense, for example?
Well, college hockey fascinates me. It's might be my favorite level of hockey to watch because it's so unique in a certain way. It requires 25-man buy-in, I think more than any level, maybe more than the National Hockey League. Like you look at the way teams win, and teams win consistently in college hockey, and it's teams they almost suffocate their players with structure at times, where you see kids that go into these programs and they maybe don't have some of the individual skill, or they do. Denver this year, they had one of the youngest teams in the country, and people talk about an older team, a more experienced team. Well, it's a team of 19-year-olds that just bought into a system and won the national championship again. And if we want to talk about a breakout, well, it starts on whether it be a puck retrieval, or it starts even before that, it starts on a battle, and it starts with support as well. So if you're a winger, well, are you going to be down supporting the puck? What's your route? What's your lane? What's the confidence you're getting with the defenseman on your back? Is he coming down the wall hard? It's about a read. Are you scanning? If a center recognizes the scan and the pressure down the wall, okay, are you running a route off his back heel, or are you running a route under the puck? Are you going to come low and slow? It's it's a it's almost like you're implanting certain concepts into players, and you're instilling them, and it's just over and over and over, and it's repetition. And teams pre-scout so strongly at that level, I think. And you see teams come into games, and they've seen a team's trap, and they've seen a team forecheck. And I love to watch and study the college game, especially because you can see the way teams plan for certain opponents, and you can beat teams with concepts and with patterns over and over again. And it's all about adjustments as well. So if you're retrieving pucks and a team's suffocating you by splitting the ice in half, and a guy's shooting down that weak side wall and picking up your, whether it's a D to D, or if you're playing a hard, heavy, weak side rim, okay, well, now all of a sudden maybe you're hitting the middle lane. Now the middle lane guy is supporting with a little bit different of a timing. And maybe that allows your strong side winger to post up at the maybe a little bit higher. Maybe he's outside the zone now. Maybe he's pulling a defenseman back. Okay, your weak side winger might be slashing now. He might be running a support even deeper underneath the puck. You know, if your center's playing off back heel. So there's a lot of different elements that go into it, and this is why I like the college game, because it's you could study it and you can learn a little bit more about the team approach and the way teams plan and the way teams pre-scout. And yeah, I love to watch Denver because they just keep winning over and over again, and you'd like to see how it's replicable. But it's in my opinion, it's my favorite hockey to watch. Maybe it's just because I grew up in the US watching it all the time. But it's I love April, and I love seeing teams that win.
Yeah, I feel like Denver's a good team. UMass is a good example of this. Taylor Holiday's Maine's got a little bit of it now too. Where you see like very big principles in place where like for example, do you always skate first? Like that's your first option. If you can break it out by skating, like do that. And then the wingers push. If you're wheeling, they're pushing. So now you've got great spacing to go into. You're not running into next layer as soon as you beat F1. So now the D's got to cover multiple like so much space. It's impossible.
Mhm.
Like my grandmother can, if it's in tight quarters, she can defend that. And you open up in space, like we're worst defender ever. Just based on pure spacing. Or like if you got nothing, wingers might be pushing out anyways because we're flipping pucks out and we're going to have this battle in the neutral zone rather than the D zone, and everyone's on the same page as that. So it's kind of like the long ball in soccer where you may not be looking to get the first ball, but all those second balls you want those, or the pucks dancing on edge. Who's going to get there and who's going to get the recovery? We're just trying to get numbers around it where we can have some good battles and good advantages. It's like get into a puck to the net when you got a 2-on-1. Well, you got 2-on-1 there, it may not be the best shot, just get it there and get a good chance of getting the rebound and being able to maybe make a small pass that leads to a goal. And then even like their ozone is quite interesting to me as well because you see this with Ohio State women's team where it's kind of a little bit old school where you get the puck deep, then you work it high and immediately go in D to D pass, and then the puck's hopefully delayed for a second and everyone's crashing the net going for rebounds. But at the same point, they've got a little bit of variety to them where they'll do like the ozone scissors. So if someone's climbing a wall, that D's activating down most of the time, where you're trying to get the winger or the forward climbing up off the wall so that D guy has the spacing he needs on the outside. So there's just like a lot of little details that go into coordinating the game because they've historically not had the high level prospects you see with the Michigan State, the Minnesota, Boston College, at Boston University, the historic programs. Yet, is it two or three of the last X amount of national titles they've won?
Yeah, like 3 of 5.
It's quite impressive. Yeah, like the
Yeah.
coordination and just finding the players to figure out how do we work this together and lean into the idea of we get the players first and the system follows. Like what kind of players do we have? And that dictates kind of how we're going to play. What's our opponent good at? That's going to dictate a little bit of how we play. We've got some things we need to protect, but figure out an advantage and go attack.
I love that you talked about the offensive zone there because it's one of my favorite concepts, and I love that the the high cycles and the way that teams play off wingers, and we talk about defensive centers right now, and we talk about guys like Barkov earlier, and we talked about Bergeron, and so much in the modern game, the wing has to defend so much now. Like we have defensemen that can activate down the wall and create advantages off one touch, off a hip open, off a acceleration back the other way. So you see teams that can roll now and they can stack concepts off that. They can add a winger that comes up and supports. They can play a third guy between the two defensemen that all of a sudden is rotating downhill. If the low guy gets a puck and he goes behind the net, well now you can hit the differential with the guy coming downhill through the slot or off the elbow. Or that guy who's rolling can continue his roll. Well, now he's up in the zone. He can either hit the cycle, the scissor with the high D man, or he can hit the weak side defenseman activating now. So these teams they can leverage these options, and there's so many options in the offensive zone. And I think this is the best area to study. And you see these kids that, like you mentioned, they're maybe not the top prospects. They're maybe not the first round picks. But if you get them to play a certain way and understand these things and instill them in them through whether that's small area games or game concepts or thinking things through in film study and those routes and those pathways, if you get kids to think the game at that level and at that pace consistently and over again and how to fill and how to be responsible, you could see some of the best hockey in the world in my opinion. So it's I love the offensive zone concepts and I love the way that studying the way that players think and the way that players create advantages.
Yeah, it's truly a fun thing to watch and discover and keep your curiosity on. Um, I do want to go one more key area I want to make sure we connect on here. I know we're coming up on time. It's been a great conversation. Um, Scouting practices. I find that you learn a lot in just watching a practice. Like you can figure a lot about a player. Like for me, it's you get a lot more puck touches. You get to see a lot more of the situational play where they only you might see it one or two times during a game. But I'm curious when you're scouting a practice, what are you looking for? What are you watching for? Because it is such an rich environment for getting a lot of information about a player, and I would say even more around the personality and how they go about their business and their process.
Well, I love it. Whenever I get the opportunity to go in the rink and see a kid skate with their team, it's the best, I think. And it a lot of it depends on what type of practice they're running as well. It's a big factor. If a team is maybe doing more of a line rush, more of a 3-on-2, more of a full ice breakout, flow drill type skate, well, you might be looking more at the way they move, some of their mechanics, some of their posture, those types of elements. Whereas I love to see teams that throw in like a 3-on-2 and throw in a 4-on-2 and throw in a half ice, and all of a sudden now it's a mid length of the ice, and you're going. and you're getting a touch now in a brand new situation, and you see kids, you can see reps over and over, you see advantages. You can see a 2-on-1 in limited space that starts with a puck pickup off the wall. Okay, well, how do they create that puck pickup? How do they accelerate through it? You can see the reps, and you can also see the way the kids carry themselves, like you mentioned. I I'm still learning some of the character evaluation stuff and trying to get better at that. And it's such an important part of the game and such an important part of the mental makeup and a player's upside, like we talked about earlier. Um, Kids that create their own luck, kids that can create their own opportunities, kids that put in a little bit extra work and put in targeted work. It's not just shooting pucks after practice and trying to hit the crossbar 100 times. It's you see guys like Kucherov and they're throwing pucks around the wall and they're trying to kill spin and they're trying to, okay, well, how do I pick up a puck with pace? How do I pick up a puck going back the other way? How do I pick up a puck with my forehand and then spin off it? Okay, how do I apply those mechanical skills? Well, I need to work on them in practice after a skate for 5 minutes and take 30 reps. Well, the kids that you see doing that consistently and doing that for skills specific to their role, especially a kid that's going to play a heavy wing style in the National Hockey League, well, you might be working on giving bumps, taking bumps, spinning off, that type of stuff over and over again. And when you see kids that are doing that consistently, know what their job is going to be, know how to get better at it, that's a very, very big or green flag, sorry, excuse me, for guys that are going to continue to find their game and continue to develop. You almost take ownership of your own game, right? And like a lot of kids, maybe they're looking around and talking about how they can develop otherwise. Well, your development for the most part primarily is on you, and you have to figure out what are you as a player, what are you going to be, and how do you become your own type of player, and how do you become the player that you want to be. You take ownership of your development and your pathway.
Yeah, I think there's a few things that to build off that you're touching on, which is kind of like the practice habits. Like, how do you go about squeezing the most out of the practice? Like you're making orange juice. How do you get the most juice out of that orange? Practice the same way as how do you get the most out of that practice? And the point that you're making is like, are you actually having an intention going into practice of what you're trying to do? Or you've got this activity. What am I trying to do within that activity? There's plenty of players that do the same thing, and I just do what the coach asked me to do, and that's great. But you're to your point, relying so much on the coach. Like, how are you developing the little nuances, the little details? How are you making it interesting for yourself is probably a good way to put it as well, because there are so many opportunities. Some coaches do the same thing over and over. I was talking with a former NHLer here in Columbus, and he mentioned in college every single pre-skate before a weekend game was the exact same. He knew exactly what was coming every single time. And for him, he was talking about the differences between the players that really got the most out of it were the ones that did the little details and kind of made it their own. Like, I know what's coming, so how can I add this little ripple into it? How do I mess around a little bit with this? Like, you don't want to break the flow of the practice per se, but you also want to make sure that you're adding details and layers. And we talked about making a detailed player. Like, it's a great way to add details and become that detailed player. But you don't do that without setting an intention, a goal of what you want to work on today. Like today, I'm focusing, I know rims are coming. I'm focusing today on just killing the spin. I'm focused on just getting the puck off the wall. If I know I'm getting a pass to the point as the D guy, like I'm going to put movement before that puck ever gets to me into it. Like that's a huge advantage versus I get the puck and then I walk to the middle. Like it's too late. You're not actually like you're putting yourself in a bad spot. You're limiting space, you're limiting time. You don't have the movement to get out of it versus a player that's able to take that within movement. So it's like, how do you form those practice habits to squeeze the most juice out of it? And then the last piece that you mentioned that I thought was great is that you kind of see the character. Like, are they fun and light and getting lots out of it and talking to their teammates are like, oh man, look at this, look at that. That was cool. Like versus the guy who's just kind of keeping to himself and flow of information does equate to speed of learning many times. So we need to make sure that we're constantly communicating, talking. I love when forwards and D get to talk together after rep, like, oh, those because you're starting to see it from the other person's perspective. Like, how do I make their life hard? How do they make my life hard? How can I approach it a little bit better? Just kind of work together and find that teammate that helps push you in some shape or form, mentally or physically.
Yeah. And I like that you mentioned the practice habits, especially. I just want to go back to that really quick. I like that you mentioned the guys that put their own spin on things because I think when you have that approach, whether it's, okay, I'm going to scan this touch, I'm going to add a little fake, like you see guys running through flow drills and you see a guy's putting a deception move on the air and you're you see that and you think, okay, like this guy, like maybe he's thinking about things a different way. He's thinking about the way that he wants to play the game a different way. Well, no one's making you do a punch turn on the blue line, but the guys that think about the game maybe a little bit differently, the guys that want to continue to add layers and continue to add more advanced thoughts of the game and more advanced ideas, I think they get better a little bit quicker. Guys that push themselves, guys that try and do a little bit different every day. And you talked about the forward defenseman and the way that players talk to each other and the way that players rehash certain ideas. And I think it's the best because you often see defensemen complaining about drills that are too hard and are too easy on the forwards, and you see forwards complaining about drills that are too easy on defensemen. And then you see players try and leverage that. Okay, if I only have to create space in three strides and he only gets two, okay, well, what direction am I taking those strides in? Can I freeze him? Can I go at him and freeze him for a second and then attack? Can the defenseman take a first step, cut you off, and then take his two and you're at zero? Like just little things like this, like where players start to realize their limitations that have been set for them, and then they talk about it and they work off it, and then they put it back together again with the best leverage that they can and using the weaknesses that they're given and almost turning them into strengths and using the strengths they're given and making them even stronger and leveraging them properly. So I think it's fascinating to think about things that way.
All right, we can keep going, but I think it's time to like my whole thought is how can we do this efficiently? Just as much we talk about our players being efficient, how can we do it here
Yeah.
as well? But no, this has been fantastic. Whittaker, where can people find maybe some of your work? Obviously, Elite Prospects is a great place to go, other places to follow and get in kind of your sphere of influence because I think you got a lot of good thoughts and put in a lot of time and effort and see the game and watch a lot of games. So it's a great leverage point for others to use.
Yeah, Elite Prospects is where a lot of our work gets filed. I'm on Twitter, just under my name, Whittaker Heart, which is where I file most of my thoughts. I have some older work on my Substack as well, which is linked on my Twitter. Um, I just try to put together as many thoughts as I can and try to put in the work. And it's a lot sometimes, but I love the game and I'm trying to figure this thing out one step at a time and try and keep getting better. And I've got a lot to learn, but it's podcasts like yours and podcasts elsewhere where you can add a lot of information quickly, and I appreciate it, and I've appreciated this conversation quite a bit. So
Much appreciated. Thank you so much.
yeah, thank you.
That concludes this week's episode. Thanks for joining us here at Hockey IQ. If you haven't already, take a quick moment to hit that subscribe button, give us a thumbs up, and drop a review. If you want to be a great teammate, even recommend us to a friend. You can follow us at Hockey's Arsenal on Twitter and Instagram. Check out the website, hockeysarsenal.com, where you can subscribe to the weekly newsletter. You won't regret it. Catch your buttes here next week for a brand new episode.